How you guys doing today? Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today we are going to talk about vehicle stops, traffic stops, and why is there a conflict between police and the public? I mean, at this point right now, our main concern is why is the public not letting the officers do their job? So right now I'm going to let you watch a video, and then I got two special guests on to talk about that video. And as always, guys, thank you for watching.
I'm Debbie Smith with Dallas County Sheriff's Department. The reason I'm pulling you over is because your license plate light is out. You have your driver's license?
Be sure to give him your CHL.
You have the weapon in your vehicle? Is that a yes?
Correct.
Yeah, man. That's what I gave it to.
Where's the weapon at?
Wait.
Do me a favor and step out here with me.
I haven't committed any crimes, man.
I'm asking you to do that while you got a weapon on you.
But you have the CHL, so he's authorized to carry and conceal. You don't have to raise your voice, but you don't have to raise your voice.
Because I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to him.
Well, I already answered you, man. I haven't committed
I'm
any
asking you to
crime.
step out of the vehicle while you have a weapon on you.
I can take the weapon off
For
of
my
you.
safety and your safety.
I gave you that for your safety.
I understand why you gave me this. You're required by law to give me this. It's not for my safety.
All right, welcome back. We just got a chance to see that video. A little controversial, if you will. It kind of went viral on Facebook. So I figured, why not discuss it? So with me right now, I have Matthew Peluso. He's a lawyer, civil rights attorney, correct?
Yes.
And I also have Michael Palumbo, who is a traffic defense attorney. Am I saying that right?
Traffic ticket defense lawyer.
Traffic defense. Say it again?
Traffic ticket defense lawyer. I specialize in subsection of criminal defense. I do traffic tickets and auto crimes.
Okay, but easier to say, owner of AttackThatTicket.com.
AttackThatTicket.com.
All right, so let me go first with the with Matt here. So you saw the video. This is your first time seeing it.
Yes.
What's your thoughts initially?
My thoughts were that this is very typical of what I think is going on nowadays, and that is that every time there is a traffic stop, everybody starts pulling out their cell phones, and it turns into a mini trial on the side of the road. And regardless of whether or not in this particular video you had a white police officer and you had African Americans in the vehicle, citizens cannot get into extended verbal arguments with police officers when they pull them over. If a police officer tells you to get out of the car, even if he's wrong, my advice to all people is get out of the car. And you know, I'm a civil rights attorney. I represent people of color, every gender, sexual preference that there is. But my advice is get out of the car. Follow the police officer instructions, especially if you're not doing anything wrong. Because we don't want police officers, those of us that are lawyers, we don't want police officers getting into many trials on the side of the road.
Now, Mike, obviously you're here because you have a different perspective, right? Now, the moment the person mentioned that they had a concealed carries permit, right? The officer says, well, maybe there's a weapon on the scene. You know what? Let me get this guy outside the vehicle. And the officer thinking that it's his right to get that individual outside the vehicle. You would disagree, say the individual has a right to stay inside the vehicle.
Well, first of all, Matthew, in this situation, with having a weapon on, legal weapon on him, do you think the police officer had the right to get him out of the car?
My position is that if a police officer tells you to get out of the car, you get out of the car.
But
even if he's wrong, follow his instructions.
But in this situation, analyzing it, I don't think that the police officer had a right to ask him to get out of the car in this situation, simply because he had a legal weapon on him. So this motorist was as vetted as a police officer is in carrying a weapon. He's been through background screening, he's been through fingerprints, vetting, he's been through FBI vetting, and he had the legal right to carry that gun. So just because he legally had a gun on him, that doesn't give the police officer the right to ask him to get out of the car, because getting out of the car is a seizure. When you're being taken into custody, even though not physically, maybe but handcuffed, when a police officer says get out of your car and get over here, the police officer is seizing you under the law, and the police officer only has the right to seize you when it's reasonable to do so. And in this case, just because you have a legal weapon on you, in my opinion, doesn't make it legal. Now, to Matt's point, I don't think the guy was right in arguing with him. What he should have done was said, first of all, when you don't want to get out of a car and the cop says, get out of the car, ask him, officer, are you asking me to get out of the car? Or are you ordering me to get out of the car? Because if they say, well, I'm asking you, then you can say, well, I'm not getting out of the car. You're just asking me to get out of the car. You know? If they say, yeah, I'm ordering you, get out of the car. You say, officer, I'm getting out of the car. I object to this. I'm doing it only because you're ordering me to do it. I'm allowing you to see. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to fight with you. You're seizing me. And I'll get out of the car because you've ordered me to do it, but I'm doing it over objection. That's how you do it. You always make the police officer make it clear that you're not just doing it out of consent. Make him order you to do it. This way, there's undoubtedly constitutional protections have attached to what you've done. And to Matt's point, I think it's good that everyone has videos, because now we can see what the cop said, what this person said, and whether or not something was done consensually or under a seizure that the cop was making.
Let me ask you. So, like, just from my perspective, if I was an officer, right, and I had pulled somebody over or whatever, and let's say there was a weapon. Now, again, even though he admitted that it's a concealed weapon, he's voluntarily given that information, there's still a weapon. So my thing is, I would still like to have that person and that weapon in view. So asking the person out of the vehicle, in my instance, is, I do agree with the officer, is for safety. Do you believe that when the officer is asking the individual out of the vehicle, it's because of safety for everyone that's involved?
Right, I mean, and it's important to remember that police officers are killed primarily at road stops. It is the most dangerous position that any police officer is placed in, because you just don't know what you're dealing with. Now, in a situation like this, and I'm not as familiar with concealed weapon issues, although I did look up Texas just when you told me about the video. Under the Texas concealed permit, it actually says a police officer has a right to disarm you at any point in time, and you have to comply. Therefore, even if he didn't have the right to necessarily do it, if he tells you to give him the weapon, you've got to give him the weapon. So that's even under Texas law. Now, putting that aside, the fact of the matter is that it's very dangerous. He hears that there's a weapon. How does he know that the police officer know that that weapon is the weapon attendant to that concealed permit? Maybe he's got other weapons. His concern was only to have the guy step out of the car. Now, if you're asking me if this all plays out down the road, the guy gets out, the cop searches the car, and he finds a bag of marijuana in it, is that going to be suppressed probably evidence? Absolutely, because there was no attendant drug potential there. If he goes in and finds an illegal AK-47 in the back seat with a 10-year-old, that regardless of whether or not he had the right to tell him to get out in the first place, it's probably going to go through on evidence. So these things are very fact specific, and road stops are very dangerous for cops. And so again, what I always advise clients is just comply, especially if you're doing nothing wrong. Now, second of all, if you are doing something wrong, I actually think that's where Mike's point comes in. If you actually know that you've got something illegal in the car, you better start trying to get your constitutional rights taken care of right there. You can say, I don't think you have a right to order me out of the car and to search my car. And I'm telling you right now, if you're ordering me to do it, I'm going to do it, but I think you have no right to do it. And then if they find something, you can try to say, I told him he had no right, I tried to, I raised my constitutional rights, and he just still did it anyway.
Right, and I know you got a thought, right? You want to...
Well, I totally disagree with just comply, because saying we have constitutional rights in the United States, and one of them is to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. To say, well, since you have nothing to hide, just comply is like saying, you know, I'm a very uncontroversial person. I have nothing controversial to say about anything. So I don't agree with the First Amendment right to free speech. That's what you're saying, Matthew, when you say, well, just comply, especially if you're not doing anything wrong. I'll tell you why I don't want people rooting through my car. And I have nothing to hide. I've earned that car. It's taken me many years to buy the car that I have. It's my property. And I don't care if a person's a police officer or a non-police officer. I don't want a stranger looking through my stuff. And I have a constitutional right to tell them you can't look through it without a warrant or without probable cause. Another thing you mentioned is, yeah, you're right, police officers, the most dangerous thing they do is road stops. But vast majority of police officers are killed not by the person in the car, but by getting struck by another car. It's much more dangerous. The danger on a motor vehicle stop is from getting struck by another car. That's why every state has the move over law, where you have to move over away from, out of the lane that a police officer or an emergency vehicle is in.
So when someone has a permit, right, the permit's going to give you the serial number and everything of the weapon, right? So why carry that permit if you're not going to produce it and then show your weapon and validate that that's the... I mean, I wouldn't want the weapon taken out in the vehicle anyway. That's why I'm telling the guy, let me see your permit, hypothetically. Once you show me the permit, okay, step out so I can see your hands when you pull out the weapon. That has to be controlled. That has to be, controlled.
I agree, but the cop didn't say that was the purpose. He just said, you're going to stand here while I watch you, while I write my ticket. He didn't say he wanted to inspect the weapon. And I don't know if it was on the first 6 minutes, but the entire thing says, at one point he says, I'll show you my weapon if you want it. And that was my last point.
But so if so the moment the person says that he wants to show his weapon, wouldn't you think that the cop would feel safer that the guy goes for his weapon outside the vehicle and in view? Because the problem is you can't see this side. You can't see what's going on. And then you also have a 2-year-old inside the vehicle.
Yeah.
So do you think it's really unlawful for him to say, hey, do me get outside the vehicle and let me see what you have?
I agree with you, but that's not what we watched. The cop never said that he wanted to inspect the weapon. And the guy did offer him to inspect the weapon. And that was my other point to Matt. Matt had said, well, how does the guy know that the weapon is the weapon that he has the permit for? Matt, he doesn't know. But just because you don't know something, that doesn't mean you can start. You need probable cause to believe it's not the right weapon before you can start inspecting weapons. If he doesn't know, he can't be raising that issue. You can't justify, well, I didn't know this, I don't know that. No, you need affirmative, some reasonable suspicion to believe that that weapon, even though he has a permit, is not the weapon that he should be holding. And Matt is right. If, under Texas law, if the cop asks for the weapon, he had to give him the weapon. So, under Texas law, the guy might have been wrong, but we're talking about general constitutional provisions here. But if you listen to the video, and I don't know if it was on the first snippet that everyone can see, he did at one point say, "Would you like me to give you my weapon?" But the cop never said, "You're going to get out of the car because I want to inspect your weapon. I don't want you reaching for it while you're in the car," which is totally reasonable. That I wouldn't be holding my position if that had happened, but that's not what the cop was saying.
Okay, so what's your thoughts on that?
My position is that Mike is right when it comes to being a lawyer and to ultimately arguing the case in a court, but from a practical perspective, what you don't want to do is justify a police officer arresting you, rightfully or wrongfully, and the fastest way to get arrested is to disregard a police officer's instructions. If he tells you to get out of the car and you don't get out of the car, now he's got a concern, why aren't you following my instructions? Let's say he arrests you wrongfully. Now, okay, sure, you can get Mike. I'm sure that the arrest is going to get bounced out, but that means you got to go to jail. Your car is going to be impounded. You're going to be locked up for a while until you can post bail and get out. All of this could be avoided if you very simply follow the instructions of the officer. And if you're not doing anything illegal, my advice to all people, follow the officer's instructions. Don't argue with him. Just do it. If he's wrong, then you call up a lawyer like Mike, or if it's a civil rights violation, somebody like me, and we'll be happy to step in and do it. But why drag yourself through? Because what sometimes happens is that individuals fight and argue with officers. They fail to follow their instructions. They end up getting tacked on to their thing, a resisting or an obstruction to an underlying charge that actually was garbage in the first place, so that they never would have had anything happen to them. Only now what happens is, in practical matters, not in constitutional right matters, but in practical matters, is they go in front of a local judge who knows all the local cops, and he sees them every day, and the officer comes in, if there's no body camera, and says, this guy was mouthing off, and he resisted when I tried to arrest him, and now they're looking at having to defend a resisting charge or an obstruction charge when the underlying charge is irrelevant now anyway.
Here's a problem with just comply, okay? And again, I'm not saying that this guy shouldn't have got out of the car at a certain point. He should have, okay, even though I think it was wrong. The problem is that, and I'm not averse to cops, because cops are trying to do their job. Cops want to keep stuff consensual. Cops want to keep stuff, well, I just asked him to do it, and when he stood up, the weed fell out, and I saw it. Because if everything is being done consensual, you have no constitutional protections whatsoever, and that's the best scenario to get evidence into court, and that's the best scenario for law enforcement. That everything he did was on consent. I just asked him to get out of the car. I asked him if I could look in the car. I asked him if I could look in the glove compartment. He said yes. Now they ask you in a certain way, like you think you're being coerced into doing it, but if they ask you, they're asking you, they're not telling you. So, in a way, I agree with Matt. You shouldn't, basically do what that guy did, but you make them order you. Do you mind if I look in the car? I'm sorry, officer. I don't give consent to search. Why not? I don't give consent to search. And then they continue to go back down that road to you, say, officer, am I still being detained or am I free to go? You need to make them seize you, make them search you without your clearly without your consent, because this protects you against everything. And look, again, not every cop is bad, but you go on YouTube, you see cops planting evidence. the problem is you don't know what cop you're getting. You're getting the good guy who's just trying to do his job and may think something's a little suspicious, realize it isn't, or you're getting the guy who wants to make detective by making the most amount of road stops and seizing the most amount of drugs. You don't know if the cop you're dealing with is going to plant evidence. So you need to protect yourself from bad policing, illegal policing, and just in general, your right to privacy. We have a right to say, you know what, I don't want you looking in my car.
So let me ask you a question, Lucas. So is there any time where that protection for the civilian can affect the protection for the police officer? Because what I'm saying is the fact that him exiting or having that person exit the vehicle seems in my mind, because he does mention it's for his safety. So is there ever a point where the safety of the officer and the safety of the civilian conflict?
It should never conflict. Officer safety 100% of the way, but also safety in totality of the circumstances. They're always going to default to, I made him do that for officer safety. But you got to look at the totality of circumstances. He's with his wife. He's with his kids in the back seat. He produced this concealed carry permit. If he was standing there, he could have called for backup, which he ended up doing. There were, in the totality of circumstances, did he really have to get him out of the car for officer safety purposes? I don't think so.
Well, if I may again, and I want you to continue talking. I just want to ask Matthew something. It's funny. You guys are both MPs.
Yeah.
Matthew Peluso, Michael Palumbo. They're very close names,
Right.
man. But Matt, let me ask you something. So he does bring up a point, but my concern is maybe because those people were in the vehicle, that's maybe why he would want the person out. Think about it: a weapon in the vehicle. You got a 2-year-old and a passenger.
Correct.
Maybe it is in the
Absolutely.
interest for everyone to take that person out of the vehicle, just the totality of circumstances now, and it's not just him in the vehicle.
You're starting to change my mind.
Wait. So again, sorry.
Well, yeah, because he doesn't know.
That's what I do.
He doesn't know, really whose kid it is. He's not checking ID on that yet. He doesn't know what the weapon is or where the weapon is, and he doesn't know anything about the guy yet. He's just asking him to step out to make sure that when he sees the weapon, I assume that's what he was going to plan on doing. Search the car to seize it. Now, look, if he, as I said, if he searches that car, and I actually agree with Mike on the fact that if you actually are doing something illegal in the car, yeah, you might want to start trumping up your constitutional rights. Like, excuse me, you have no right, sir. You got nothing to lose, because he's probably going to bounce you out of there anyway, and they're going to find it. So you might as well start claiming your constitutional rights to, no search and seizure, especially if it was something like a broken tail light, and now they're searching intended for drugs when there was no drugs and no drug indicia, that he just kind of concocted it, which is what bad police officers often do, unfortunately. But in this case, when there's a weapon, I agree with you. When there's a weapon, the individual in the car just has to get out. There's, as you said, show where the weapon is. Here it is. I'm giving it to you. I'm telling you there's nothing else in the car. But if you want to search, go ahead. But I'm telling you there's nothing else in the car. Now, if they go and they search, and again they find drugs, I think that might be suppressed, because that's irrelevant in light of the fact that there was no need for that. You're looking for a weapon, nothing else.
Look, again, I agree he should have got out of the car, but the problem I have with your position is that you don't agree that the motorist should make it clear he's doing it under duress.
He can do that. No, I'm not arguing with that. I don't want to cross it. I don't want to talk across purposes. I agree with you. There's nothing wrong. There's never anything wrong for an individual to, number one, ask the police officer, why are you asking me to do this, right? And number two, say, listen, I'm going to comply with your instructions, but I'm doing it. Oh, you're doing it over my objections. And if you don't want him to search, say, I don't consent to you searching. You don't, technically speaking, waive your rights if it's an illegal search anyway, and there really wasn't a basis for it. You can still argue. You don't waive at the scene, technically speaking, because you can say, he didn't tell me what he was searching for. And so, again, that gets into more technical arguments. So I'm not disagreeing with Mike. You can always ask a police officer, why are you asking me to do it? But if he still insists, get out of the car, get out of the car.
Now, there's one more thing I want to mention, then we'll kind of start bringing the show to a close. I want to talk about training, because it's something that you brought up I thought was a very interesting perspective. And you talked about how officers are maybe being trained to be overreactive when doing pullovers. So can you just, a few...
Well, not particularly pullovers. I think since 9/11, the police officers have become more militarized, due to the fear that occurred on 9/11, and they are the first responders. But it's gone, I think, so far, the training has gone so far towards tactics and minimizing any potential danger versus understand that you're policing a community of people that really, you know, don't understand, initially what you're doing. People don't walk through the world thinking when the cop stops me, I'm going to do this. People are slow, mentally slow. People have disabilities. Not every non-compliance is a threat to you or an insult to your badge. But the thing is, I think that the training has gotten to the point where police are almost militarized. And I think that makes them overreact in certain situations. And I think like you said, 20 years ago, the guy probably wouldn't have been asked to come out of the car. I don't know if we were talking about that on or off camera. I think 20 years ago he was, oh, you have your CCP, where's your weapon? All right, stay here. I don't think he would have been asked to come out of the car 20 years ago. I think that the training has gotten so hypersensitive to making sure, try to neutralize every threat, which is impossible in policing.
Let me ask something though. Because the times are different now. Do you think the training is just a reaction of what's out there? Do you think it's gotten to that point, like 20 years ago to now? Do you think that maybe we're reacting to the times, and that maybe officers right now, we've had those vehicle stops that have been we've been shot at or whatnot. So do you think that maybe we've upped the training based on the evolution of where we're at right now?
Well, crime has gone down dramatically since the 80s across the country. And it wasn't just in New York City and Rudolph Giuliani and Mayor Bloomberg. Crime has gone down, dramatically. There's less dangers out there now than there were years ago. I'm not saying it's not a dangerous job. It's a dangerous job.
Maybe we know about it more because it gets the cell phones out there, the videos are out there. So maybe you're right. Maybe crime has gone down, but maybe we're being shown a lot more than we ever were before. So even though crime went down, people have a way of, I got that phone, I got instant access. So even though you're right, the numbers may be down, but it's making its way to the mainstream because people always have that smartphone on them and they always have a way to record something. So what I'm saying is, even though the crimes went down, it seems like we see more crimes nowadays because of the availability of a smartphone, if you will.
Yeah, you see more, right, and you also see more bad policing now, which makes people more paranoid. I don't know if it was on that video. That guy said, I don't know if we saw in the what you said. The guy said, "Why should I get out of the car so you could shoot me?" Now cops don't routinely shoot people in general and minorities, but it's on video all the time now. So that perspective, that skews the public's perception of policing. It's like man bites dog always makes the paper, right? You know what I mean? Like the normalcy of how police interactions go don't make YouTube. But the extreme of bad policing and bad people hurting police officers, that's what everyone sees.
Well, it goes both ways though, and one of the things that we've seen is that too many police officers recently have been gunned down while sitting in a car. So the idea now that just because somebody is acting nicely, that's what usually happens. They walk up to the police officer and then they just pull the gun and shoot him. So I think police, to a certain extent, are super hyped up concerned about weapons. As I said, if this guy was asking this guy to step out of the car because he had a brake light and nothing else, obviously that's wrong. I think when it comes to weapons, police officers are far more concerned because there does seem to be more of a target on police officers now as far as direct shooting and killing than there was 20 years ago. It used to be that maybe police officers had use of force issues with suspects. That's always been there, including deadly. But this is different. This is where now police are specifically targeted and assassinated. And so, yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of police officers out there that are super sensitive to the fact that when somebody says they have a weapon, just because they show a piece of paper that says it's a legal permit, they want to see the weapon, they want to make sure that it's okay. And all he was doing was asking them to get out of the car for that reason, as far as I could tell.
I do agree that their times have changed right now, and the respect for law enforcement has somehow lessened a little bit. Now, whatever that's based on, we can argue that all day, but the point is, when someone in uniform comes on the scene, it used to be you get that automatic respect, and like you said, like 20 years ago, you complied. But I believe that the uniform, along with the badge, has been bastardized to the point where when people are attacking law enforcement or coming at them, they actually feel somewhat justified in doing so. And I do believe, to some extent, that there's definitely a big target on officers back. So obviously the training that they're getting right now, in my opinion, is reflecting the times that they're in. But again, that's my opinion. I really do think that both you guys presented great arguments because it's meant to be informative. So I think officers and civilians alike can take a lot from both sides that was presented today. So do you have anything you'd like to say in closing, Mike?
While I thought under the circumstances, the cop didn't really have a right to ask him to get out of the car, he should have got out of the car. And then my point goes to what you said. You could assert your civil rights politely and respectfully. You don't have to scream at the cop. You don't got to, say, derogatory things to the police officer. It's a professional interaction. You assert your constitutional rights professionally. And if a cop ever does get out of line, the most powerful thing you can do is say, they start getting aggressive with you and they start insulting you, whatever. You know what? Why don't you call your sergeant? That's the most powerful thing you could do. When you assert your civil rights politely and when you ask for a supervisor, you know what you're telling the cop? I know the system. I know what's going on. I know my rights. And that's going to change their attitude. That's going to change. If a cop's doing something he shouldn't do, it's going to adjust his attitude and you're going to be off that stop a lot faster. So you can always be polite. And if they order you out of the car, just make it so that it's clear you're being ordered out of the car. And do what they say, and you can argue it later.
And Matt?
Yeah, it's, as I said, I think in today's world, what I advise people is, number one, don't start recording any interactions with a police officer from the get-go. It sends a bad message to the law enforcement officer. I mean, maybe you're getting pulled for a speeding ticket and you were over the speeding limit. So rather than directly turning everything into some sort of videoed experience, first see whether or not there's actually anything that's really happening here. And if there isn't, then put the cell phone away and stop trying to argue with the police officer, because again, we don't want, take my word for it, citizens, you don't want police officers acting like lawyers or judges. We just want them to do what they got to do, and if they're right, fine. If they're wrong, then you get a lawyer and you fight it later. We don't want roadside courtrooms, and we don't want videos to antagonize police officers for no reason other than the fact that you're videoing one just because you got pulled over. So everybody calm down, relax a little bit. If a police officer tells you to do something, just do it unless you're doing something wrong. And then then I think, Mike's point's well taken. Then you might as well start asserting your constitutional rights, because you're probably going to go down anyway.
As far as we mentioned that before, most of the time the people that may do that may look for that technicality because there's other stuff to be discovered.
Absolutely.
Maybe.
But
at the end of the day, the reason why I did the show was meant to inform. Believe it or not, both gentlemen I have on the show appreciate the service by our law enforcement professionals, and I thought that they can come out here on their own time because they drove from far. This wasn't easy drives for either one of them, and thought that we could inform so we can build that bridge to understanding, because that's the problem right now. I have a feeling that we have two perspectives on each side of the spectrum with no one making an effort to bring that perspective to the middle, and that was today's attempt on Tier Talk. I saw the video went viral, and I just thought it was a great dialogue to have. So again, I want to thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for coming. Again, guys, show is Tier Talk. My name's Anthony Gangi, and cage is closed, guys. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks.